Hello, and today we're going to be reviewing the Ryobi p546btl 18-volt chainsaw. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, first up we have the grips, or the ergonomics of the tool. Overall, I'm actually fairly happy with the design here. The foregrip grip is nice and large, and you can easily grasp it at the top or on the side for when you need to work on clearing brush or cutting through tree limbs. Quite frankly, I actually think the grips on this particular tool are about as good as you're possibly going to find on a chainsaw, at least one of this particular style. Now, the foregrip is made out of plastic, which it wraps around, but it is perfectly firm and you're not going to have to worry about it bending or breaking easily. And I'm fairly happy with just the overall design decision and aesthetics here. Now, the rear grip is going to be, well, a typical enclosed grip. It's going to have a nice rubberized texture for, well, better gripping. But it's still large enough where you can easily wear gloves if you want to while operating this particular tool. So when it comes to the overall ergonomics of the tool, I think it's a perfectly acceptable performance and it gets a pass from me. Okay, next up we have the trigger system. Now the trigger system on this particular tool is integrated with the safety, which means in order to pull the trigger, you will have to pull that safety back and then you can pull the trigger. Now on my particular copy of the saw, which I've now owned for a couple of years, I have noticed that, well, sometimes when I pull the safety back, it doesn't always allow me to activate the trigger. I've noticed that when this happens, I have to really force the safety all the way back very rapidly, and then I'll be able to activate the motor, which is, I think, a little bit of a design flaw, or maybe I just have a bad copy, I'm not sure. But this is something I've been noticing more recently, and not something that I noticed when I first purchased the saw. So just be aware that this could be a potential point of failure for those who are just looking to buy the saw now. Now, when it comes to the overall design here, I'm perfectly happy with the design choices they went with. The safety is easily reached with your thumb, and the overall trigger is large enough where you could use one finger or two fingers in order to activate the motor. Speaking of the motor is basically a simple non-variable speed motor, which means you have one speed to work with, but that's acceptable with this sort of a tool. So at the end of the day, I do like the trigger system, and I do think it's completely acceptable. I'm just a little bit worried that there might be some larger issues on this particular model of tool. Maybe this is an issue Ryobi fixed quietly since I purchased this saw a couple years ago, or it could still be an issue for people buying the saw today. I'm unsure, so just be aware of that if you are planning on purchasing this saw. Okay, next up we have the oiling system, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I think it's very, very, very bad. The tank is very small, and it's hard to tell when you're about to overflow when you're filling it up with oil. The oil itself leaks out of the tool whenever you set it down anywhere, and the little primer button, you don't ever even have to press that because the oil will just leak out. And there's no way of turning off the oil, so you're going to have to end up draining that little tank of oil each and every time that you want to, well, store the tool for any period of time. And quite frankly, I really don't understand why they can't put a little ball valve in between the oil tank and the, well, oiler point on the saw blade. So at the end of the day, the oiling system on this particular tool is definitely mediocre, and I think that's even giving it too much praise at best. So I think this is a part of the tool that could use a drastic redesign, and please, any manufacturer of chainsaw, put a little ball valve in between the oiler and the tank so that I don't have to drain it every single time I need to use the chainsaw real quickly for a quick job. So yeah, the oiling system on this particular tool needs improvement. Okay, next up we have the front guard. Overall, the front guard it's adequate. There's really nothing special about it. It's flexible. I don't have to worry about it breaking because they use the good quality of plastic, and it's thick enough and it's slightly bendable. And well, yeah, that's about the size of it. It's a front guard. It does its job just fine. I don't necessarily think you need it on an 18-volt chainsaw, but hey, at least they included it. Moving on. Okay, next up we have the onboard tool, as well as the clutch cover and the tightening screw for the chain. Now, the onboard tool is located directly beneath the tank that has the cutting oil and is easily accessible, and I've never had an issue with it falling out, so that's a perfectly acceptable design. The tool itself is an Allen wrench, with the short end having the Allen head and the long section having a flathead tip for, well, adjusting the chain tension on the front of the tool, which is not a great design, but we'll cover that here in a second. When it comes to the clutch cover, however, the clutch cover is made out of black plastic and is secured by a single Allen bolt, and is fairly easy to work with. I don't really have any complaints. You'll loosen it slightly in order to adjust the chain, or you can remove the cover completely by, well, removing the bolt. Underneath the cover, we're going to go ahead and see that we have a single sprocket, and it's a fairly big basic design. It doesn't need to be cleaned too often because everything falls free fairly easily, and I don't really have any major complaints, so everything on the inside of the tool is perfectly acceptable as far as I'm concerned. However, when it comes to adjusting the tension of the chain with the screw on the front of the tool, that's another story. Unfortunately, it's a little bit of a process. Like I said earlier, you're going to loosen the bolt and then you're going to flip over the chainsaw to, well, adjust the screw. And this is not an easy, well, job, simply because you don't have much room to work with. It's a flathead, so it's constantly slipping out of the groove, and, well, let's just face it, it's just not a great design. Because of where the screw is located, you can't completely turn the Allen wrench in a complete circle, and this is definitely going to make it a pain because you're never going to be quite in the position you want to be in. So this is definitely an area of the tool that needs a redesign and something that gets a little bit of a black mark from me. Moving on. Okay, real quick, the bar seems to be of a high quality. I haven't had any issues with it bending or getting distorted or twisted, and everything here seems to work as intended. So as far as I'm concerned, the bar is completely passable on this particular chainsaw. Now the sheath, on the other hand, that's a different story. It's sort of what I would say a, not designed for this particular tool, but it was included anyway, sort of a sheath. It's too loose, it's too wiggly, you can wiggle it from side to side. If you carry it in the wrong position, it'll fall off. It just isn't a great experience. The quality of the sheath is decent. I mean, it's made out of a decent quality plastic, and it definitely will protect, say, your seats or whatever surface you're having the chainsaw sitting on from the chain itself. But at the end of the day, I wouldn't recommend carrying this particular chainsaw around with the sheath because you'll just end up losing the sheath. Okay, next up we have the battery slot. The battery slot will fit any of Ryobi's 18-volt lithium batteries, and I think it's a fairly decent slot. I don't have any complaints about the battery being too loose, and I haven't had any issues with the batteries accidentally falling out or not powering the tool, so everything here gets a pass. When it comes to battery life, I would only recommend using 3 amp-hour batteries or higher with this particular tool, simply because, well, it's a brushed chainsaw, and, well, 1.5 amp-hour batteries or 2 amp-hour batteries just aren't going to provide you with a whole lot of runtime. But if it is a super small job, you could still possibly get away with that. And last but not least, we have the hole for hanging the tool up. Now, this is actually kind of a cool little thing, and something I wish Ryobi did with more of their tools, like a certain vacuum cleaner I reviewed last week. I wish that tool had this little feature. But at least when it comes to this particular tool, it does feature a little slot that you can hang the tool up in the vertical position if you so choose to. So, as far as I'm concerned, this is a nice feature to have. Moving on to the weight. Okay, without a battery, the chainsaw weighs 2,631 grams, which is a little under 6 pounds. And with a 4 amp-hour battery, it weighs 3,346 grams, which is a little under 7.4 pounds. Okay, let's talk about this chainsaw in use. First up, we have the ergonomics. The ergonomics of the tool are actually fairly easy to work with in just about any situation. If you're climbing a tree or on top of a ladder, it's lightweight and will give you enough reach or maneuverability with the rear handle in order to complete any task you need. Now, when you're working close to the ground, that large wraparound handle will mean that you can easily grasp it and control it without sticking the front end into the dirt, doling your chain. So everything here is perfectly acceptable and is fairly easy to work with, so no complaints. But where I do have a complaint would be the oiling system. This thing leaks more oil than a BP oil tanker from the early 2000s, and that's not a good thing at all. And if you are transporting this particular tool, say to your parents' house, to a friend's house, or anywhere that you might be using this that isn't your house, you're definitely going to be wanting to stick oil or cardboard underneath it to prevent that oil from ruining your upholstery of your vehicle. And, well, even if you do empty the oil tank out before transporting it or storing it, you're still going to get oil leaking out on whatever you have it set on because of, well, the oil that's still in the system. I don't know how it doesn't manage to lose that oil, but it never does. So yeah, the oiling system on this particular chainsaw is pretty bad. But when it comes to the amount of power this particular chainsaw has, it's average. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's not the most powerful 18-volt chainsaw on the market, but it's not the worst either. It's pretty middle of the pack, and it will be able to complete pretty much anything you can throw at it that's in a 10-inch chainsaw's job description. Just remember that it's going to require a little bit more time because of that brush motor, and well, the fact is, there are better chainsaws on the market now that have more powerful motors for about the same price. So it's really going to be up to you. So with that being said, let's recap with the pros and cons. 18 volt. 18 volt means that it's going to work with all your standard Ryobi 18 volt batteries, and you will be able to adapt batteries over from other brands via third-party adapters if you so choose to. Just remember, you do that at your own risk. Lightweight. Overall, this is a fairly lightweight little chainsaw, especially if you compare it to a gas-powered chainsaw. So that is a little pro in my opinion. Onboard tool. Having the onboard tool means that when you need to adjust the blade tension, it will be an easier job. Large handle. Overall, the large handle makes this a much easier tool to use, especially if you're working close to the ground or up in a tree. So this is a pro in my opinion. Mounting hole. For storage applications, this is a great little feature, and it's a feature that I wish was included on other Ryobi tools. And the first meh would be the trigger. I don't know if it's just my particular copy, but the trigger being finicky is sort of, well, not desirable. But I think it could just be mine, so that's why it's not in the con section, it's in the meh section. And the next meh would be the spikes. The spikes that are sort of meant to, well, hook onto a tree limb or whatever on the front of the tool are made out of plastic and are very small. So they're just kind of eh. And the first con would be the price. Coming in at $129, this is a fairly expensive price for this little chainsaw. And considering that the competition will be as low as $75, I have to say that Ryobi needs to rethink their pricing strategy, especially on this particular tool. And the next con would be the torque. It's not horrible, it just isn't the best, and there are definitely other chainsaws on the market that have more torque, and that can be a little bit of a con depending on what situation you were in. And the next con would be the oil system. The oiling system on this particular tool is, well, it's about as useful as a British car's oiling system, if you know what I mean. And the last con would be the chain tightening system. This is probably the biggest con because, quite frankly, it's a pain. There are other chainsaws, even from Ryobi, that have much easier systems to work on, and I have to say I was pretty disappointed by the chain tightening system on this chainsaw, even from day one. And that is it for the pros and cons. Final thoughts on this chainsaw. Overall, I think this chainsaw is showing its age. I don't think Ryobi is being realistic in their pricing structure. If this chainsaw was below $100, I would be able to recommend it just as a basic homeowner chainsaw where you just need to use it occasionally. But considering that it's $130, I just cannot recommend it because of that price point. I think there are other chainsaws that are, well, similarly priced and that come with a battery, which are going to be far more, well, appealing to a vast majority of people. Black & Decker make a little 18 volt or 20 volt chainsaw. They're the same thing. But I also own that particular chainsaw, and I like using that one just a little bit more than this particular chainsaw, and it came with a battery, and it only cost, I think it was $120 for that one. So yeah, I think there are other chainsaws from Ryobi themselves that are, well, better and only cost about $40 more. That would be a better option, and if you really want a much better option, I would highly recommend stepping up to their 40 volt chainsaws because, well, quite frankly, they're just way superior in every sense of the word. So yeah, if you can, save your money up a little bit longer and buy one of Ryobi's brushless 18 volt chainsaws, or step up to their 40 volt chainsaws and give this particular chainsaw a pass. And that's it for this video. If you liked it or if it was helpful, please like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. God bless.